Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure and honour to address you on the occasion of the European Day for Victims of Crime. The day was first marked in 1990 by Victim Sport Europe and its members. It was then, as it is now, a moment to stand in solidarity with all victims of crime, recognising the pain and suffering they have experienced, honouring those who have lost their lives, celebrating and inspired by the courage of those who, despite the burdens they bear, refuse to be kept down, to be defined by the crime they suffered. We stand in solidarity with all victims of crime, ready to offer our strength where theirs may fail. It's a moment to acknowledge our role in fighting crime in our hearts. It is a moment to renew our commitment as individuals, organisations and communities to help all victims of crime. We started 2022 facing many uncertainties. The COVID pandemic continues, tensions are rising across different parts of the world, including here in Europe. We see social divisions and the weakening of our fundamental rights and democratic systems. Even as some crimes reduce in numbers, we see others increasing and even accelerating. We know at least 15% of the population experiences serious crime every year, affecting not only those individuals, but also their families, friends, and communities. Every one of us will know someone who's been a victim of crime. Every one of us could become a victim of crime. Yet despite these fears and concerns, 2022 is a moment of great opportunity to change the lives of victims. It's been 10 years since the EU Victims Directive was adopted. This year and in 2023, we're likely to see new or updated EU laws on gender-based violence, on child sexual exploitation, and on human trafficking. We can expect to see a proposal to improve the EU Victims Directive, as well as new action on hate crime and hate speech. But it's not certain that these proposals will be made. Even where they are put forward, member states or the European Parliament may choose to weaken the protection they offer to victims. There are those who may argue that new legislation or more legislation is not necessary. On the European Day for Victims of Crime, I would call on all of you to fight for progress, to support improvements in European and national laws, and above all, to make sure those laws become a reality, that they truly do help victims of crime. Because despite progress, such proposals are sorely needed. Victim Sport Europe has carried out research across the European Union, which has highlighted the many problems faced by victims when seeking justice, accessing support, and in the way they are treated. I hear repeated testimonies from victims about the terrible experiences that they have. Just at the end of last year, a courageous lady gave a speech at our conference in December. She'd been raped using a date-directed drug, and she reported the crime. Her experience reporting the crime and seeking justice went extremely badly. In fact, it was so bad that she told the audience in no uncertain terms that her experience of the criminal justice system was worse than the rape itself. These are truly sad indictments of our justice systems, our responses to victimization. But the most serious indictment will be our failure to address those problems when we know they exist. Of course, I'm not saying that these cases, these failures, are happening systematically and frequently in every country and throughout each one of those countries. But they're happening often enough across many countries that I can say change is needed, and it's needed urgently. And this means change at all levels, at the international, European, national and local level, but also within our organisations, within our societies and within individuals themselves. To stand still without assessing, without evaluating and without improving is to fail victims. There's no shame in reviewing our work and laws and being open about the challenges, about the change that is needed. There's only shame in hearing the stories and testimonies of victims, of the pain and suffering they experience unnecessarily and doing nothing. The good news is that there remains a momentum for change. Recognition that by getting it right for victims, we respect not only their fundamental rights, but we also help individuals cope with and recover from crime, improving the health of our citizens, creating more cohesive societies and more effective justice systems, all the while boosting our economies such that every action to address the needs of victims is an investment in all our futures, increasing our resilience in these unstable times. And we've seen this momentum in Latvia, We see the amazing work of Skalbesh and other NGOs supporting victims. We see, for example, changes in police practices to keep victims and suspects separate. Year by year, we see slow but steady progress. But this progress is intermittent. Across the EU and within countries, it is inconsistent, sometimes based on local priorities or short-term funding or finite projects. Service providers may be limited by a lack of funding or barriers to cooperation. Practitioners may be blocked by a lack of tools and mechanisms to support their work or inadequate training. As we look forward to new EU action, Victim Support Europe is calling for a step change in the way we address victims' rights. We need a long-term, strategic and systemic approach to all the rights established for victims. This means in particular that in addressing victims' needs for support, it's not enough to think about the operation of individual and disparate support organisations. Rather, every country must approach this from the perspective of a national victim support framework. This means having in place a long-term strategy taken forward by a multi-stakeholder coordination of government and civil society that ensures laws, policies and practices are fully coordinated across the country. It means clearly identifying leaders at the highest levels and in every organisation working with victims, whose responsibility is to ensure victims' rights are operational. And any long-term strategy must put at the centre the victim in terms of meeting their needs for recognition and respect, for protection, support, access to justice and compensation. It means building resilience in our populations to cope with trauma even before it happens, and to work with victims to help them cope and recover in the aftermath of the crime. Many victims will never need professional help. That's often dependent on a strong social support network of family, friends and colleagues. So we too must help a victims network to provide support, informing and educating them on the best solutions. And we must ensure that professional support services are available throughout a country, not just in cities. Those services must be available to all victims, and there must be specialised services for specific groups. They must operate according to nationally agreed standards, and they must be supported to work and collaborate together rather than competing against each other. This means constantly evaluating and improving services based on what works best in different circumstances, and should not be driven by ideological positions or driven by historical data, historical priorities, rather driven by the needs of victims and by current data, current evidence and current best practices. A national victim support strategy must recognise the role of police, prosecution, judges, social service hospitals, the private sector and more in supporting victims. This may mean every practitioner should receive victim training. It may see specialist victims units established, such as sexual assault referral centres, multi-agency centres such as MARACs or children's houses. It means ensuring that every victim is referred to support services, so those services can explain directly to the victim how they can help and the victim can choose. It means adopting data protection rules which enables this to happen. Doing so massively increases access to support services, and where such referral ends, we consistently see a 70% drop in victims reaching support. There's much that can be done to make the support system for victims more effective, more coherent, and more collaborative, so it can help to deliver for victims in a better way. The advantage is that for every euro invested in those services, you get back between 5 and 8 euros from healthier populations, stronger economies, and more effective justice systems. Our justice systems can also be vast. Today, justice is judged by whether the guilty are found guilty, the innocent found innocent, and whether it's efficient. This simply isn't good enough. When trial results in a guilty verdict, but the toll is so great on the victim that they commit suicide afterwards, this cannot be a measure of success. We must move from efficient justice to safe justice. This means expanding the current objectives to also ensure that victims are safeguarded, to ensure the risk of harm and actual harm to victims is minimised. This starts from the moment of the crime by removing the barriers to reporting and maximising access to reporting. It includes the way victims are treated within the system the way their needs are identified, and what protection measures, including physical protection measures and restraining orders, are provided to them. It means supporting them to be heard and to participate in a full and genuine way, not just in law, but in practice. Safe justice is about reviewing how our justice systems work from the lens of the victim and being open to change. It means being open to improving approaches that are sometimes based on centuries of custom. To support these ambitions, Victim Support Europe will publish 3 new papers in the coming months on the national support framework, on safe justice, and on model provisions of victims of crime. We'll publish these reports recognising the vast progress that's been made in the 20 years since the first EU victims legislation. We'll publish these reports not as a criticism of what's in place, but to show what opportunities exist to improve even further. We hope that you too will look at what's in place in your country with a critical eye, with the aim to keep advancing rights for any person who falls victim to crime. To do so recognises their fundamental value as human beings. It sits at the core of healthy, cohesive and successful societies, and it is critical to the success of our justice systems. I hope you find great inspiration from today's conference, inspiration that tomorrow will see you take bold new steps in support of all victims. Thank you, and I wish you all a successful conference.